The rain in Chicago didn't just fall that Tuesday. It punished the pavement with a rhythmic, violent thud that drowned out the city's heartbeat. Inside a flickering, neon-lit diner just blocks away from the gold-plated skyscrapers of LaSalle Street, Arthur Vance sat alone. To the world, Arthur was the iron architect of Wall Street, a man whose $14 billion fortune was built on the ruins of his competitors. He was a titan who had just survived the most brutal, hostile corporate takeover in U.S. history. But tonight, stripped of his bespoke Italian suit and draped in a soaked, generic trench coat, he looked like a ghost haunting his own empire. Arthur watched the steam rise from his $3 coffee with the intensity of a sniper. He pulled a crumpled $10 bill from his pocket and slid it across the Formica counter toward the waitress, Clara. "Keep it," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across a grave. This wasn't an act of charity. For 40 years, Arthur had used the $10 test to measure the soul of everyone he met. If they grabbed it too fast, they were greedy. If they ignored it, they were lazy. He was always the hunter, and the world was his laboratory. But Clara didn't reach for the money. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she pushed the bill back with a steady finger, her eyes locking onto his with a terrifying, piercing clarity. "I can't take this, Mr. Vance," she whispered. The air in the diner seemed to vanish. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He hadn't introduced himself. He was miles from his office, dressed as a commoner, yet this woman in a stained apron knew exactly who he was. "You know me?" he asked, his hand instinctively reaching for the encrypted satellite phone in his pocket. "Everyone in this city knows the man who just signed the death warrants for 100 children," she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a cold, sharp fury that felt more dangerous than a blade. "You cut the funding for the Lincoln Park pediatric wing this morning to balance your quarterly sheets. My son is in room 402, hooked to a ventilator that your board of directors just labeled an unnecessary expense. That $10 tip doesn't buy back the breath you stole from him, Arthur. Keep your money. You're going to need it for the funeral you're causing." Arthur was the most powerful man in the room, but in that moment, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. How did a waitress know his private board decisions? And why was his phone suddenly showing no service? If you're ready to see the hunter become the prey, hit that like button and subscribe right now. The real nightmare is just beginning. The realization hit Arthur like a physical blow to the stomach. He hadn't authorized any cuts to the pediatric wing. In fact, that hospital had been his late wife's favorite charity. It was the one line he had sworn never to cross. He fumbled with his phone again, desperate to call his head of security, but the screen remained a mocking, black mirror. The diner's flickering lights suddenly died, leaving them in a suffocating twilight, lit only by the strobing headlights of a black SUV screaming to a halt outside. Out of the darkness stepped Daniel Vance, Arthur's only son and the heir apparent to the Vance fortune. For a split second, Arthur felt a surge of relief. His son was here to rescue him from this strange, prophetic waitress. But as Daniel stepped into the light, the relief turned to ash. Daniel wasn't wearing a look of concern. His face was a terrifyingly blank mask of corporate efficiency. He didn't offer a hand to his father. He simply looked at his watch. "The doctors signed the death certificate an hour ago, Dad," Daniel said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Arthur began to shake, his mind racing to the boy in room 402, but Daniel shook his head slowly, a cruel smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Not for the boy, old man. For you." As far as the state of Illinois and the SEC are concerned, Arthur Vance suffered a catastrophic mental break tonight. You've been wandering the streets, delusional, throwing money at strangers. You're dead to the world of business. And soon, you'll be dead to the world of the living. Arthur looked from his son to Clara, expecting her to be horrified. Instead, she stood tall, wiping the grime of the diner from her hands with a calculated grace. She didn't look like a grieving mother anymore. She looked like a predator who had finally cornered its kill. "Thank you, Daniel," she said, her voice shifting from a Chicago trill to the sharp, elite accent of a Silicon Valley power player. "The recording is perfect. The mental instability angle is locked in. The woman Arthur knew as Clara reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound legal folder embossed with the seal of Sterling and Associates. Arthur gasped. Rebecca Sterling. She was the most feared litigator in California, a woman who had vanished 3 years ago amidst rumors of a multi-billion-dollar corporate espionage scandal. She hadn't been working in a diner. She had been deep undercover, weaving a web around the Vance family for months. "You've grown sloppy, Arthur," Rebecca said, tossing the folder onto the grease-stained counter. "You thought you were testing me with your little $10 games? I've been testing you. I've spent the last 6 months documenting every lapse in your memory, every erratic decision, and every test you've performed on the public. We have enough testimony from your staff at the Vance estate to prove you are no longer fit to manage your own shoes, let alone a global conglomerate. By sunrise, Daniel will be the interim CEO, and you will be a ward of the state." Daniel stepped forward, his shadow looming over his father. "It's over, Dad. I've already contacted the New York Times. The story breaks in 20 minutes. The fall of the Iron Architect. They'll say you succumbed to the same dementia that took your father. We're moving you to a secure facility in the Hamptons. High walls, soft rooms, no phones. You'll have a beautiful view of the ocean while I sell off your legacy piece by piece." Arthur felt the walls of the diner closing in. He looked at the $10 bill on the floor, the very bait he had used to catch a loyal citizen, now mocking him. He realized that the cuts to the pediatric wing weren't just a business move. They were a weapon used to bait him into this specific diner, at this specific hour, where no witnesses could hear his side of the story. He was being buried alive in a tomb made of legal paper and family betrayal. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder. But they weren't the police. 2 men in white medical scrubs entered the diner, carrying a folded restraint chair. They were private medics on Daniel's payroll, trained to handle high-profile extractions. The reality of his situation settled over Arthur like a lead shroud. In the eyes of the law, he was about to become a non-person. No lawyer would take his call, because Rebecca Sterling had already conflicted out every major firm in the city. Daniel leaned down, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Did you really think I'd wait for you to die, old man? You've held the keys to the kingdom for too long. You turned me into a shadow, a Vance in name only while you took all the glory. Well, tonight, the shadow takes the throne." He signaled to the medics. "Take him. Use the sedatives if he resists. He's confused, remember?" As the medics reached for Arthur's arms, a sudden, sharp change came over the old billionaire. The trembling in his hands stopped. The look of defeat vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying glint in his eyes, the same look that had made him the most feared man on Wall Street for 4 decades. He didn't fight the medics. He simply looked past them at his son and began to chuckle. It wasn't the laugh of a madman. It was the laugh of a man who had just seen his opponent play a losing hand. "You always were impatient, Daniel," Arthur whispered, his voice gaining a sudden, commanding resonance that made the medics hesitate. "You and Rebecca spent months planning this accident. You studied my habits, my tests, my finances. But there is one thing you never understood about the Iron Architect. I never enter a room unless I already own the exit." The medics paused, looking at Daniel for instruction. Daniel scoffed, though a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "You're bluffing, Dad. Your accounts are frozen. Your board has flipped. You have nothing." Arthur leaned in, his face inches from his son's. "Check the time, Daniel. It's 11:14 p.m. Exactly 60 minutes ago, before I walked into this rain, I met with a notary at the Chicago Club. I rewrote my will, son," Arthur hissed, his eyes darting to Rebecca, who had suddenly gone very still. "And I didn't just change the beneficiaries. I added a trigger clause. If I am ever declared mentally unfit, or if I am committed to a facility against my will, the entire Vance fortune doesn't go to you. It doesn't go to the board. It immediately liquidates into a blind trust managed by your greatest rival, Marcus Thorne." Daniel's face turned a sickly shade of gray. Marcus Thorne was the man who had been trying to bankrupt the Vances for 20 years. But Arthur wasn't done. He turned his gaze to Rebecca Sterling. "And you, Rebecca, You were so worried about the boy in room 402. You used a dying child as a prop to break my spirit. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing any of them had ever seen. You should check your phone, Rebecca. Because while you were busy playing Waitress, my security team was busy at the hospital. Check the room. Check the bed. Your son isn't there. In fact, if I were you, I'd ask Daniel where the boy really is. The silence in the diner was deafening, broken only by the sound of Rebecca's phone hitting the floor. Daniel stepped back, his hands shaking. Dad, what did you do? Arthur stood up, shaking off the medics as if they were nothing more than dust. I didn't do anything, Daniel. I just watched you walk into the trap I set 40 years ago the day you were born. Now, the real question is, who is actually waiting for you in the SUV outside? The diner's front door creaked open, but it wasn't the wind this time. A woman stepped out of the shadows of the alleyway, her silhouette framed by the pulsing blue and red lights of the approaching ambulance. She was draped in a trench coat identical to Arthur's, but when she lowered her hood, Rebecca Sterling let out a scream that sounded like breaking glass. It was Olivia Vance, Arthur's wife, who had supposedly perished in a Malibu plane crash 5 years ago. You look like you've seen a ghost, Rebecca, Olivia said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as sharp. She walked toward the counter, stepping over the crumpled $10 bill without a glance. Did you really think Daniel was smart enough to coordinate a Silicon Valley lawyer and a Wall Street coup on his own? He can barely manage his own offshore accounts. Arthur stood frozen, the iron architect finally looking humanly shocked. He had mourned this woman for half a decade, building monuments to her memory in Central Park, only to find her standing in a greasy diner, allied with his enemies. But the betrayal ran deeper. Olivia reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, high-tech jammer, clicking it off. Instantly, every phone in the room erupted with notifications. I didn't come back for you, Arthur, she said, looking at her husband with a chilling indifference. And I didn't come back for Daniel. I came back for the keys to the Vance Global Ledger. She revealed that the plane crash wasn't an accident, it was her escape from Arthur's control. She had been the silent partner funding the hostile takeover from a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The woman he loved was the architect of his ruin. But Olivia just mentioned a ledger, a secret document that contains the names of every corrupt politician on the Vance payroll. If that ledger goes public, it won't just be the family that falls. It'll be the entire US economy. Do you think Arthur has one last card to play? Type Vance in the comments if you're Team Arthur, or Olivia if you think she deserves the crown. Rebecca scrambled to her feet, her professional veneer completely shattered. Where is my son, Olivia? You promised he'd be safe. You said if I broke Arthur, you'd provide the marrow transplant from the private Vance donor bank. Olivia laughed, a cold melodic sound that made the hair on Arthur's neck stand up. Rebecca, you're a brilliant lawyer, but a terrible mother. Did you never wonder why your son's DNA didn't match yours in the hospital records? Arthur's eyes widened as the pieces of a 40-year-old puzzle began to lock into place. He looked at Daniel, then back at Olivia. The boy in room 402 isn't her son, is he? Arthur whispered. Olivia turned her gaze to Daniel, who looked like he was about to vomit. The boy in the hospital is Daniel's secret child, Arthur's only true grandson. And the reason he needs a transplant isn't a random illness. It's the Vance curse. A genetic blood disorder that Arthur has been hiding from the Wall Street investors for decades to keep the stock price from plummeting. The hostile takeover wasn't just about money. It was a desperate, bloody scramble for biological survival. Rebecca had been tricked into thinking she was saving her own child, when in reality, she was a pawn used to steal Arthur's genetic records. Daniel had betrayed his father to save his son, but in doing so, he had handed his mother the ultimate leverage. Olivia now held the life of her grandson in one hand, and the destruction of the Vance legacy in the other. While the family tore itself apart in the diner, the world outside began to scream. Because Arthur had triggered his final will, the Vance Enterprises stock began a death spiral on the New York Stock Exchange. Trading was halted, but not before $2 billion in market value evaporated in 10 minutes. The FBI and the SEC were already battering down the doors of the Vance headquarters on Wall Street, prompted by the anonymous leak Arthur had set up as his failsafe. If I can't have the empire, no one can, Arthur said, his voice regaining its ironclad authority. He looked at his wife and son. "You wanted the architect? Well, welcome to the demolition." He revealed that the $10 bill on the floor wasn't just a test, it was a physical key. Embedded in the paper was a micro RFID chip. When it touched the diner's counter, which Arthur had secretly outfitted with a reader weeks prior, it began uploading his confession to every major news outlet in the country. The confession didn't just detail his finances, it detailed the original sin. Years ago, to secure their first billion, Arthur and Olivia had staged a massive industrial accident in Gary, Indiana, to collect insurance money and buy out their competitors. The blood of hundreds was on the foundation of the Vance Towers. "We're all going to prison tonight, Olivia," Arthur said with a grim smile. "The only question is, who dies in a cell and who dies in a hospital?" The private medics Daniel had brought were now useless. The sirens outside were no longer private, the Chicago PD had the building surrounded. Rebecca, realizing she had been used by both sides, grabbed the $10 bill from the floor. "I can stop the upload," she screamed, her eyes manic. "I know the Vance encryption. I can save the company, but only if you give me the transplant codes for the boy." Daniel lunged for the bill, but Olivia stepped between them, pulling a small silver pistol from her coat. "The company is already dead, Daniel. The only thing left is the legacy." She pointed the gun at Arthur. "Give me the codes to the private vault in the Hamptons, Arthur. The one containing the original ledgers. I can buy our way out of this. I can disappear again, and I'll take the boy with me. He'll live, but he'll never know your name." Arthur looked at the chaos he had created. His wife was a ghost with a gun. His son was a traitorous failure. And the only innocent person, a child in room 402, was a bargaining chip. The Iron Architect realized that for 40 years, he had been building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand and blood. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a second $10 bill. "You want the truth?" he asked. "The codes aren't in a vault. They're tattooed on the boy." The room went silent. The implications were horrific. Arthur had turned his own grandson into a living safe. "He's the only one who can unlock the future," Arthur whispered. "And the only way to read the code is to save his life. The Vance curse isn't a disease, it's a chemical lock. Give him the cure and you get the empire. Let him die, and we all burn together." As the police kicked in the diner doors, a flashbang grenade blinded the room. In the chaos, shots were fired. When the smoke cleared, the diner was empty. Only the $10 bill remained on the floor, soaked in rain and blood. The Iron Architect, the ghost wife, and the traitor son were gone, leaving behind a city on the brink of financial collapse and a mystery that would haunt Wall Street for a generation. The hospital in room 402? It was empty, but on the pillow was a single note, written in Arthur's unmistakable hand. "The test is over. You all failed. Arthur Vance has disappeared, taking the secret of the Vance legacy with him." But wait, the FBI just found a hidden camera in the diner's ceiling. The footage shows someone else was in the kitchen the entire time. Who was the real mastermind behind the Vances? Subscribe now and hit the bell, because we're dropping the FBI evidence tapes in part 2 soon. You won't believe whose face is on that camera.